While Ordnitz's ancestors ruled over Lombardy, the great Emperor Antios lived at Constantinople and governed Greece, Bulgaria, and many other lands. When he died, he confided his son Hugdieterich to the care of his faithful friend Bertung, Duke of Meran, whom he had himself brought up and afterwards covered with honours. Bertung felt that his first duty was to choose a wife for his ward, and that only a princess of equal rank and great beauty and wisdom would be a suitable helpmeet for so mighty a prince. He had travelled far and wide, and amongst all the princesses he knew there was one and only one that he could propose as a wife for his liege lord. But there were many difficulties in the way. Bertung confided his troubles to the prince, and told him how much he wished to bring about a marriage between him and Hillpog, daughter of King Walgund of Thessalonica, but he feared it would be impossible, for Walgund loved the maiden so dearly that he had shut her up in a high tower and permitted no one to speak to her except the old watchman, himself, her mother, and her maid. This he did, fearing lest she should marry and leave him. Hugdieterich listened to the strange story with great interest, and determined to get a sight of the maiden if he could. So he set to work to learn all that he might of women's works and women's ways, even going so far as to dress himself in women's garments. After which he announced his intention of going to Thessalonica to make fair Hillpog's acquaintance. He arrived in due course at Thessalonica, disguised as a great lady, with a numerous train of female servants. Hearing of the new arrival, the king and queen invited the stranger to visit them. She did so, and gave their majesties to understand that she was Hildegunde, sister of the Emperor Hugdieterich, and that she had been outlawed by her brother. She begged the king to protect her and to provide her with a lodging in his palace, and at the same time presented the queen with a costly piece of embroidery as a sign of her goodwill. Her request was granted. The queen then begged her to teach her ladies to embroider as she did herself. After this all went so well that Bertung and his men-at-arms were sent back to Constantinople, their protection being no longer needed. Fair Hillpog heard what was going on, and begged her father to allow her to see the embroideries, and the artist who worked them. No sooner had she done so than she wished to learn the art. Walgund gave his consent, thinking the stranger a very suitable companion for his daughter, and Hillpog found great pleasure in her company. It was not until weeks afterwards that she discovered who her teacher was, and when she did, their friendship became stronger than before, until it grew into acknowledged love. The fear lest their secret marriage should be discovered one day reached a climax. "What will become of us?" cried Hillpog. "My father will never forgive us. He will order us both to be slain." "Then at least we shall die together," replied Hugdieterich, "but I hope for better things. The guards and your personal attendants are on our side, and I expect Bertung very soon to come and take me home to Constantinople, on the plea that my brother has forgiven me. I shall then send an ambassador to ask for your hand in marriage, and when your father knows our secret, he will not refuse his consent." Bertung came as Hugdieterich had expected, and fetched him away, but the wooing had to be put off till a more convenient season, as war had broken out on the frontier, and the emperor was obliged to take the field. Meantime Hillpog was in greater danger at home than her husband in the midst of battle. She had a son. He was born quietly in the tower, without any one except the 3 faithful friends who guarded the princess there knowing aught about it. It was not until months after this event that the queen, her mother, sent to say that she was coming to visit her daughter. She followed almost on the heels of the messenger. The porter pretended to have great difficulty in unlocking the door, and by the time he succeeded, the watchman had smuggled the child down to a safe hiding place beside the moat. It was already evening, so the queen spent the night with her daughter. When she was gone next morning, the faithful servant hastened to where he had hidden the child, and it was not to be found. After long and anxious search, he returned to his mistress, and told her that he had taken the boy to a nurse, who had promised to bring him up carefully and well. Soon after this, Bertung arrived at Thessalonica to thank the king in his master's name for the reception he and his family had given the princess, his sister, and to ask for the hand of the lady Hillpog, with whom the emperor had fallen in love from his sister's description. The king put off giving any immediate answer to this request, and asked Bertung to a great hunt he intended to give in his honour on the following day. It was a lovely morning when the hunters set out for the forest. They rode on cheerily, and had a good day's sport. At length chance led the king and Bertung past the tower where sad Hillpog spent her weary days in waiting for the husband who came not. As they rode along, they discovered the fresh track of a wolf leading towards a spring. They followed the spoor, which led them to a den in the thicket close by, and in the den was a strange sight. In the centre of the nest, and surrounded by a litter of wolf cubs so young as to be still blind, lay a beautiful child. He was playing with the little wolves, pulling their ears, and chatting in baby language such as only mothers and nurses can translate. But evidently his companions did not like his attentions, and the mother wolf's ire was so roused against him that it wanted very little more to make her spring upon the child, and put a sudden end to his play. The old wolf came up at the same moment, so that the danger was much increased. Seeing this, the two hunters flung their spears with so much skill as to kill both the old wolves on the spot. Then the king lifted the baby in his arms as gently as if it had been his own child. "'Tis very strange," he said, "how much I feel drawn to this boy. But he must be hungry, poor little man. My daughter's tower is close to here. We shall find some fresh milk there, and she will be glad to see the little fellow. She's so fond of children, and seldom gets a chance of seeing them." They walked on slowly, Bertung carrying the child, while the king examined the wolf's track with great interest and attention. "Look here," he said, "is it not strange? The tracks lead straight from the den to the moat. I wonder if the wolf stole the child from anywhere near this." Fair Hillpog was not a little astonished when she heard her father's tale. She took the child in her arms, and at once recognized him by a birthmark on his arm in the shape of a red cross. She struggled to conceal her feelings, and offered as calmly as she could to take care of the child, and only begged her father to send a nurse as quickly as possible. When he got home, the king told the queen of his adventure, and she was very curious to see the child. She sent for a nurse, and accompanied her to the tower. Arrived there, the queen sought her daughter, and found her busied with the child. "How I wish," said the queen, taking it in her arms, "that I knew who the boy's mother is. She must be in such distress." "Yes," answered Hillpog, "but look at his clothes, how fine they are. They show that he is of princely descent." "Oh dear," sighed the queen, "what a lucky woman I should think myself if I had a grandson like that." Hillpog could keep her secret no longer. She threw herself into her mother's arms, and told her with many tears that she was secretly married to Hugdieterich, and that the child was theirs. The queen was startled, angry, but it was done, and could not be undone. It was at least a comfort to think that the child's father was a mighty emperor. She told her daughter she would say nothing, but would think what was best to be done. Waldgrund felt strangely attracted by the child. He came to the tower almost every day to visit it and his daughter. On such occasions the queen would tell him how much she wished for a son-in-law, and such a grandchild as this. She reminded him that they might in their old age fall a prey to the barbarous tribes in the neighbourhood, if they had not some young, strong man to take their part, and added that in her opinion Hugdieterich would not be amiss. In short, the queen prepared the way so well that when Bertung made his formal offer for the princess's hand, the king, after slight hesitation, gave his consent on the sole condition that Hillpog was not averse to taking Hugdieterich as a husband. The queen then told her lord the whole story. "Wonderful!" he exclaimed, too much astonished to be angry. Hugdieterich arrived soon afterwards, and was publicly married to the Lady Hillpog. After the wedding festivities were over, he set out for Constantinople, accompanied by his beautiful wife and the little boy, who was named Wolfdieterich, in remembrance of his first adventure. With the Empress went Sabine, one of the notables of Thessalonica, as her father had much confidence in his wisdom and wished him to be his daughter's counsellor in any matters of difficulty. He made himself so useful that he soon became necessary to her, and at the same time won the confidence of honest Duke Bertung so completely that he persuaded the Emperor to make Sabine regent during their absence on a foreign campaign. The high position he had gained through the Duke's kindness made the false-hearted man bolder and more self-confident than ever. One day he went so far as to speak unbecomingly to the Empress. The noble lady reproved him severely, and he fell at her feet, begging her pardon, and entreating her not to tell the Emperor of his impertinence. She promised, but commanded him never more to appear in her presence. When Hugdieterich returned victorious, Sabine was the first to meet him. He gave him an account of his stewardship, and at last remarked, as though by chance, that there was a great deal of dissatisfaction among the people regarding Wolfdieterich, the heir apparent, who rumour said was not the king's child, but the son of an elf, or, worse still, of an Alraun, who had been palmed off upon the royal family by a witch. Hugdieterich laughed at the story as at a nursery tale. The only effect it had on him was to make him take his own son from under the charge of Sabine and give him into the care of faithful Bertung, that he might learn all knightly exercises with the Duke's 16 sons. Time passed on, and the Empress presented her husband with 2 other sons, named Bogen and Wachsmuth, who were also sent to Bertung to be educated. The old Duke loved all his pupils dearly, but Wolfdieterich was his special favourite, for he showed himself full of every quality that makes a true knight and noble warrior. The busy Emperor seldom found time to go to Lilienport, the castle of Meran, and Hillpog was a still less frequent visitor, so that Wolfdieterich had grown accustomed to look upon Bertung as his father and the Duchess as his mother. His brothers Bogen and Wachsmuth had long since returned to Constantinople, where crafty Sabine did all that he could to gain their friendship and confidence. Their mother was sorry to see it, and fearing lest evil should come of it, she told her husband all that had happened between them many years before. Hugdieterich's wrath blazed forth, and Sabine scarcely escaped alive. He fled from the country and sought refuge amongst his kindred in the land of the Huns. Hugdieterich, worn out by many anxieties and battles, grew old before his time. When he felt his end approach, he arranged all his affairs with the utmost care. He bequeathed to his eldest son Constantinople and the larger part of the empire, while the 2 younger sons were given kingdoms farther to the south, and the Empress and Bertung were to see the will carried out. But scarcely was the Emperor laid in the grave when the notables of the land met in council and demanded the recall of Sabine, because otherwise they feared he might carry out his threat of bringing the wild Huns upon them. The Empress did not feel herself strong enough to withstand the clamour of the nobles, so she sent for the traitor. Forthietrich and his 11. No sooner had Sabine returned than he began to scheme again. He spread amongst the people his silly tales about the origin of Wolfdieterich. He said that the Empress had been secretly wedded to an elf while she lived in that solitary tower, and that it was elfish spells that had prevented the wolves from tearing the child in pieces. The populace believed the story the more easily from its utter incredibility, and demanded that Wolfdieterich should remain at Meran. Sabine even succeeded in making the royal brothers, Wachsmuth and Bogen, believe his tale and give him the power for which he hungered. Sure of his own position, he acted with the utmost harshness. He bade the Empress leave the palace and go to her son at Meran. He only allowed her to take with her a maidservant, a horse, and her clothes. Everything else that she possessed, whether through her father or her husband, had to be left behind. The two young kings did not interfere on her behalf, for Sabine had shown them that her treasures would be very useful to them in equipping an army, supposing Wolfdieterich and the Duke of Meran attacked them. When Hillpog arrived at Hugdieterich, an outwork of Lilienporte, she was travel-stained and sorely spent. At first Duke Bertung refused to admit her, because she had recalled Sabine contrary to his advice. But at last, filled with pity for the unhappy woman, he led her into the castle, and treated her there with royal honours. The Duchess received her surrounded by 17 young men, who all called her mother. The Empress did not at once recognize her son, who was the tallest and stateliest amongst them. But as soon as each knew the other, Wolfdieterich, throwing himself into her arms, tried to comfort her by promising to restore her to her former rank and splendour. Duke Bertung at first counselled peace, because the position of the two kings seemed to him so strong and unassailable, but at length, carried away by his foster son's enthusiasm, he not only gave his consent, but placed his 16 sons and their 16,000 followers at the disposal of the prince. It was settled, while the men were being called together, that the Duke and Wolfdieterich should set out for Constantinople, and see whether they might not attain their end by peaceful means. The day after their arrival they met Sabine and the kings in council. Bertung was received with all honour, while nobody seemed even to see his companion. When Wolfdieterich rose and demanded his rightful share of the royal heritage, Borgen answered that a changeling had no right to any share, and Sabine added that he ought to apply to the Alraun, his father, for a kingdom in the realms of hell. Wolfdieterich laid his hand on his sword, but his foster-father's words and looks of entreaty sufficed to calm him down and prevent any open expression of anger. The kings and Sabine did their utmost to persuade the Duke to join their party, but in vain, and when the council broke up, the old man went away, hiding his displeasure as best he could. He and Wolfdieterich mounted their horses and returned to Lilienporte without loss of time. After a few days' rest, they set out again for Constantinople, but this time in battle array. On reaching the borders of Meran, they found the royal forces drawn up to meet them. As the evening was closing in, they encamped in a wide valley surrounded on all sides by a forest. Next morning the troops rose refreshed, and each side made sure of victory. The battle song was now raised, and echoed amongst the mountains like rolling thunder. Next instant the armies met. Wolfdieterich was always to be seen in front. All at once he turned to Bertung and said, "Do you see Sabine and my brothers on yonder hill? I will go and see whether they, or the Alraun's son, are the better men." With these words he set spurs to his horse and dashed through the enemy's ranks. Old Bertung, who had vainly tried to restrain him, now followed with his sons and a small body of his men-at-arms. As they neared the hill, they found themselves surrounded by the Greeks on every side. The carnage was terrible. 6 of Bertung's 16 sons fell at his side, while a stone struck Wolfdieterich on the helmet and stretched him senseless on the ground. But the old Duke and his other sons picked him up and brought him safely off the field. All night long they fled, and after resting only a few hours during the day, resumed their journey. On their arrival at Lilienporte, they found that many of their men had got there before them. "We will await the traitors here," said Bertung. "They may break their teeth on our stone walls, and then go away worse than they came. We have supplies enough to last 4 years, and can bid them defiance." Soon after this, the enemy appeared before the fortress. Sabine demanded that the prince should be delivered up to them, and threatened that if this were refused, he would burn the castle and all within it. The only answer made by the besieged was a sortie, led by Wolfdieterich in person. He was still hopeful of victory, but numbers prevailed. He had to retreat, and with difficulty regained the fortress. From that day he lost the confidence and gaiety of youth, and became grave and silent. His trust in the sure success of a righteous cause was gone. He lost his faith in divine justice, and said he had fallen a victim to the resistless power that men call fate. Siegerminne. The siege had already lasted 3 years, and yet there was no hope of an end. The food had grown scanty, and if the enemy chose to make famine their ally, the castle must finally capitulate. The Duke vainly sought for some plan of deliverance. One day Wolfdieterich came to him, and said that he intended to slip out of the fortress by night, make his way through the enemy's camp, and go to Lombardy, there to ask the help of Ordnit, the powerful emperor of the West. The old man did his best to dissuade the lad, reminding him that their provisions would last yet a year, and that the enemy, already weakened by sickness, might raise the siege before long. The young hero was not to be held back. At midnight he took leave of his foster-father and his other faithful friends. "May God protect you, my dear lord," said Bertung, clasping him in his arms. "You will have to cross the deserts of Rumelia, which are uninhabited, save by wild beasts and evil spirits. There you will find Rauh Else, who lies in wait for young warriors. Beware of her, for she is a witch, cunning in enchantments. If you are fortunate enough to reach the Emperor Ordnit, do not forget your trusty henchmen, me and my 10 remaining sons." So they parted. They arranged that the besieged should make a sally through the principal gate of the fortress, to draw off the enemy's attention to that quarter, while Wolfdieterich got away by a postern door at the back. He was nearly out of the enemy's camp when he was recognized. Immediately mounting his horse, he drew his sword and cut his way through their midst, and once in the dark forest beyond, he was safe from pursuit. All night long Wolfdieterich rode through the wood. He heard the werewolves howling in the distance, but none came near to seek his life. As morning broke, he found himself by the side of a broad moorland lake. All sorts of strange creatures rose out of it, and sought to bar the road. 2 of them he killed, but he let the others escape. He wandered 3 days in the wilderness, finding nothing for his horse or himself to eat. He shared the bread he had in his wallet with his steed. It was but a little at best, and the faithful creature was at last too exhausted to carry him farther, so he dismounted and led it by the bridle. On the 4th evening, fatigue overpowered him so much that he was forced to rest. He lighted a fire with the brushwood scattered about. The warmth did him good, for a cold mist hung over the face of the earth. He and his horse quenched their thirst at a neighbouring rill, after which he lay down, and making a pillow of his saddle, thought over his sad fate. Sleep was beginning to steal upon his senses, when he was suddenly roused by a noise in the dry grass. Something black and horrible to look upon crept nearer and nearer. It raised itself in the air. Its height was appalling. It spoke to him, not with a human voice. The sound was more like the growling of an angry bear. "How dare you rest here?" said the monster. "I am Rauh Else, rough Alice, and this ground belongs to me. Besides which, I have another and a wider realm. Get up and go at once, or I will throw you into the quaking bog." Wolfdieterich would willingly have obeyed, but he was too tired. He could not move. He therefore begged the bear-like queen to give him something to eat, telling her that his cruel brothers had deprived him of his inheritance, and that he was now starving in the desert. "So you are Wolfdieterich," growled the bear-woman. "Well, fate has marked you out to be my husband, so you may count upon my aid." Upon which she gave him a juicy root, and scarcely had he eaten 1 mouthful when his courage returned, and his strength seemed tenfold what it had ever been before. It even came into his mind that he could conquer the Greek forces single-handed, and set his 11 faithful servants free. In obedience to Rauh Else's command, he gave the rest of the root to his horse, which first smelt it carefully and then ate eagerly. No sooner had it done so than it began to paw the ground, and neighed with eagerness to resume its journey. "Speak! Will you be my true love?" asked the bear woman, coming up to the youth and preparing to clutch him to her heart with her terrible claws. "Keep back!" he cried, drawing his sword. "Demon that you are, seek a husband in hell, where alone you will find a helpmeet worthy of you." "Have I not fed and secured you?" asked Frau Else. "Was that done like a demon?" "I have long waited for you to come and free me from an evil spell. Love me and save me." It seemed to the warrior as if her voice had all at once grown soft and human in its tones. "Yes, yes," he said, "if only you were not so rough and hairy." He had hardly spoken when the black fleece slowly slipped to her feet, and a beautiful woman stood before him, her brow encircled by a diadem, and her green silken garment confined at the waist by a jewelled belt. Her voice was sweet and thrilling as she repeated her former words. "Speak, young hero, will you love me?" His only answer was to clasp her in his arms and kiss her. "You must know," she said, "that although Frau Else was my name here in the wilderness, I am really Sigismund, Queen of old Troia. Your yes has set me free from the spell of the enchanter, so we can now set out for my country, of which you shall be king." Full of joy and thankfulness, they started on their way, followed by Wolfdietrich's horse. At last they heard the sound of waves breaking upon the shore, to which they soon afterwards descended. There they found a curious vessel awaiting them. The prow was formed of a fish's head, large and pointed. At the helm stood a merman, whose outstretched arm was the handle by which the rudder, or fish's tail, was worked. Instead of sails, the vessel was rigged out with griffin's wings, the advantage of which was that they enabled it to go against both wind and tide, when such a course was thought desirable. The merman was so marvellously fashioned out of cedar wood from Mount Lebanon that it could steer wherever the travellers wished without their help. There were other wonders on board the ship, such as a cap of darkness, a ring with a stone ensuring victory to the wearer, a shirt of palm silk, and many other things. The shirt seemed as though it would only fit a little child, but when Sigismund put it on her lover, it grew bigger and bigger, until it fitted him exactly. "Take care of it," she said, "and wear it whenever you are in any danger, for it will protect you alike from steel and stone, from fire and dragon's tooth." Wafted by the griffin's wings, the vessel clove the western sea, swift as the wind, and soon brought the travellers to old Troia. There the people received their beloved queen with shouts of joy, and cheered loud and long when she introduced the stately warrior Forthietrich as her future husband. The marriage was solemnized with great festivities, and a life of joy began for the new king. By the side of his fair wife he forgot all his misfortunes and sorrows, and, alas, even the 11 friends he had left in peril of their lives. Now and then, when he was alone, the memory of all that had come and gone would cross his mind like something he had dreamt, and then he would reproach himself with neglecting his duty. But Sigismund had only to take his hand, and he once more forgot that honour and duty alike bade him be up and doing. Once when he, his wife, and the whole court were out hunting, a wondrous stag with golden horns broke out of a neighbouring thicket. He did not seem to be afraid, but, after looking at the hunters, turned back to the wood. "Up, good folk!" cried Sigismund. "Whoever kills that stag and brings me the golden antlers shall stand high in my favour and receive a ring from my own hand." A number of huntsmen started in pursuit, first among them Forthietrich. The stag led him by many devious paths, only to disappear at last. Forthietrich returned to the tents much disappointed. When he got there, he found all in confusion, for that terrible magician, giant Drusian, followed by many armed dwarfs, had fallen on the camp during the absence of their king and his warriors, and had carried off the queen. No one knew where he had taken her to. Wolfdieterich was now as much alone in the world and as wretched as he had been that terrible day in the desert. One thought filled his mind, the thought of Siegerminne. He would seek her through the world, and if he could not find her, he would die. He exchanged his royal robes for a pilgrim's dress, and hid his sword in a hollow staff, which served to support him on his journey. Thus accoutred, he wandered through many lands, asking everywhere for the castle of giant Drusian. At length he learned from a tiny dwarf that the man he sought lived in the lofty mountains far over the sea, and that many dwarfs owned him for their lord. He set out again, and journeyed on, till at length the castle came in sight. He sat down to rest by a spring, and gazed longingly at the place where, as he believed and hoped, he should find his wife. His fatigue was so great that he fell asleep, dreamt of her, and was happy in his dreams. All at once he was wakened by a rough voice, and a blow on the ribs.
"What ho, pilgrim!" said the voice. "Have you snored long enough? Come home with me, and have some food. My wife wants to look at you."
Wolfdieterich sprang to his feet, and followed the giant who had wakened him so roughly, and who now strode before him to the castle. He knew that he had reached the end of his pilgrimage, and entered the wide hall with thanksgiving and joy. There sat Siegerminne, her eyes red with weeping, and as she looked at him he saw that she knew who he was. He pulled himself together with a violent effort not to betray his identity.
"There, wife," growled Drusian, "there's the priest you wanted to see, that he might speak to you about his religion. What a mite he is, to be sure, and as dumb as a lizard into the bargain. There, bag of bones," he added, turning to the pilgrim, "sit down by the fire, and see if some of our good food will not warm your thin blood."
The pilgrim did as he was desired, for, anxious and excited as he felt, he was starving. Dwarfs brought in food and drink, and he ate till his hunger was satisfied. The giant questioned him up and down, and received short answers, some of them, it must be confessed, far enough from the truth. As twilight deepened, Drusian seized the lady by the hand, and pulled her from her seat, saying,
"There, you see the son of the Aaron, who freed you from the bearskin. He will not succeed in freeing you from me a second time. He fears a broken skull too much. The term you asked for is over now, so come with me."
He would have dragged Siegerminne from the room, but the pilgrim had already thrown aside his disguise and drawn his sword from the hollow staff. "Back, monster!" he shouted. "That is my wife!" With these words he sprang upon the giant. The suddenness of the attack made the latter jump, exclaiming,
"Why, Alraun, are you Wolfdieterich? If that is the case, we must have everything fair and in order. You must arm and fight with me. If you are brave enough, that is to say, Siegerminne shall be the wife of the conqueror."
The hero consented to fight the duel, and the dwarfs brought him 3 suits of armour to choose from. One was of gold, the second of silver, and the third of iron, very heavy, but old and rusty. He chose the last, but kept his own sword. Drusian also put on his coat of mail, and caught up his battle-axe. After some time Wolfdieterich's shield was broken by a violent blow from his opponent's axe. The hero seemed lost, but avoiding the next blow, and grasping his sword with both hands, he struck so hard a stroke that the sharp blade cut deep down through neck and shoulder. Scarcely had the monster fallen when the dwarfs swarmed round the victor with their small daggers and spears to avenge their master. The fine needle points pierced the rings of his armour, but the palm silk shirt protected the solitary warrior from every wound. At last he forced them back, and husband and wife were able to clasp each other's hands, and to assure one another of a love that would last till death. "Let us away from this cursed house," cried the hero. "Who can tell but the dwarfish rabble are spinning new toils for us?" They hastened out into the deserted court, and then sought a stable in which they found 2 saddled horses. These they mounted and rode away. After a long and tiring journey they reached old Troia, where the return of the queen and her brave husband was greeted with joy. Sigismunda ruled her people with a gentle hand, but justly and firmly. No wonder, then, that they loved her. After her return she was even sweeter and more thoughtful for others than she had ever been before. But she was pale and thin, and what was worse, grew paler and thinner day by day. One evening, when she and her husband were sitting alone together, she raised her sweet face to his and said, "When I am gone, you must go back to your own country and people, for then you will be looked upon as a stranger and usurper here, and the land might be wasted by civil war." The thought of her death cut him to the heart, but he strove to look cheerful for fear of distressing his wife. He redoubled his anxious care of her, but all in vain. Her doom was sealed. He had been strong enough to conquer the giant and save his wife, but he was powerless to save her now. She died in his arms, and he laid her in her early grave. The Knife Man. Once, when he was standing sadly by her last resting place, he suddenly remembered that she had bidden him go back to his own country when she was dead, and then the thought of his mother and his faithful 11 rushed back into his mind. He also recollected that he had never carried out his plan of calling the Emperor Ordnit to their assistance. "I shall never forget you, dear wife," he murmured, "but I should be unworthy of your great love for me if I did not at once set out to bring freedom to those who have been true to the death in their fidelity to me." He turned away and hastened to make ready for his journey. He passed through many lands, rich and poor. One evening he saw a castle before him, and asked a passing traveller to whom it belonged. "Sir," replied the man, crossing himself, "ride on quickly, if you be a Christian, for that stronghold is where the heathen King Beligan lives, with his daughter Marpilia, a maiden learned in magic arts. He slays every Christian he can catch, and sticks his head on a spike placed on the battlements for the purpose. Look, there is one place empty still. Beware lest your head be sent to fill it." The hero explained that he felt no fear of that, as his armour was good, and he must have sharp weapons who sought to pierce it. But the traveller assured him that the king so thoroughly understood the art of dagger throwing that none could escape from him alive. Forthietrich and the man parted company. The former would have ridden past the castle had not the owner come out to meet him, and invited him to spend the night with him, an invitation the hero was far too brave a man to decline. The daughter of his host, a young and beautiful girl, received him at the gate, and led him into the hall. While they supped together, Forthietrich, on being questioned, told them whence he came, and whither he was going, and Beligan saw from his answers that he was a Christian. The heathen king then informed his guest, with a diabolical smile, that he had come just in time to provide a head to make up the required number on the battlements. Forthietrich understood what was meant, but shewing no signs of fear, he raised his goblet to his lips, and emptied it to the health of his host and his daughter. Bedtime came, and Beligan, taking him aside, told him that he had found grace in the eyes of his daughter Marpilia, and that he might marry her if he liked, receiving both castle and kingdom as her dowry, on one condition, that he would worship Mahmed. Wolfdieterich asked for time to think over the proposal, but the heathen smiled and said, "You may have tonight to consider the plan. That is long enough." He then offered him a goblet of wine, into which he had secretly thrown a powder. "Drink, friend," he said, "and you will sleep long and soundly tonight." The hero was on the point of obeying, when Marpilia, who had re-entered, snatched the goblet out of her father's hand, and emptying it on the floor, exclaimed, "Not so, father! I intend to teach the stranger better things tonight." She led her guest to his room, and said, "I have saved you from a great danger. My father was about to give you a sleeping potion, that he might slip into your room in the night and cut off your head, as he has already done to many a Christian. I now offer you my hand and kingdom, if you will only pretend to follow our faith." Wolfdieterich thought of Sigismunda, and turning to Marpilia did his best to convert her to his faith. They spent the whole night talking on these subjects. The next morning Beligan came, and invited his guests to join him at breakfast, and after that, in a little game of throwing the dagger, explaining that such was their custom. As soon as breakfast was over, they went into the court, where the king's servants stood round them in a wide circle. The hero laid aside his armour and sword as he was desired, and received a buckler and 3 sharp and pointed daggers. The heathen took his stand opposite, armed in like manner. The latter flung the first dagger at his opponent's foot, and he avoided it by springing to one side. "By the beard of the prophet!" cried the heathen, "who taught you that? Are you Wolfdieterich, from whom it is foretold that evil shall befall me?" Wolfdieterich would not confess to his name, but stood ready again for the fight. The second dagger scratched his head, carrying off a bit of the scalp. The third he caught on his buckler. It was now the hero's turn to throw. His first dagger pinned the heathen's left foot to the ground, the second scratched his side, but the third, which he flung with the cry, "I am Wolfdieterich," struck him to the heart. He was now attacked on all sides, but succeeded in putting his opponents to flight. He then re-entered the castle, put on his armour, took his horse out of the stable, and was about to mount, when he suddenly saw that a wide lake surrounded the castle on every side, and a gale of wind was blowing the great waves so high that there seemed no chance of escape. At the edge of the water stood Marpilia, describing circles in the air and on the ground with a magic wand, and murmuring to herself all the while. Riding up to her, he caught her in his arms and swung her before him on his horse. "If I am to drown, witch, you shall not escape," he said. With these words he spurred his horse into the wild waves, and saw that the waters stretched out farther and farther until they seemed a sea. He looked around and saw that only one chance was left him. He flung the witch-woman off his horse. Instantly the storm ceased, the waters retired, and he was once more on dry land. But Marpilia was not drowned. She appeared before him again in all her beauty, stretching out her arms as if to embrace him, but he threatened her with his drawn sword. She then changed into a magpie, flew to the top of a high rock, and sought from thence to entangle him with new enchantments, each more terrible than the other. At last, thoroughly spent with fatigue, he exclaimed, help me, thou 3-in-1, or I die!" Scarcely had he uttered the words when the witch vanished. The sun shone once more upon the mountain vale, and before him lay the broad road that led to Lombardy. After meeting with many adventures by land and water, he travelled through a wild mountain region, and there he fell in with a giantess, an old friend of his father, who received him very kindly and told him, amongst other things, of the sad fate of Ordnit and Liebgard. Although her tale diminished his hopes of help, he was yet determined to continue his journey. The giantess said it would take an eternity travelling as he did. Horses were so slow. With that she picked up both horse and rider and carried them pick-a-back on her broad shoulders 350 miles in one day, over mountains, valleys, and rivers, and set him down in the fair land of Lombardy. The Lindworm. It was a beautiful moonlight night when Wolfthietrich reached Garden. He dismounted, and standing under the shadow of an olive tree, he looked about him. He saw 2 women walking on the seashore. One of them was tall and stately. When she threw back her veil, he nearly uttered a cry of astonishment. She was so like Sigemine. Had the grave given up its dead, or had some deceitful elf taken the beloved form to lead him into danger? He stood breathless to listen, and heard Queen Liebgard, for it was she, complain to her serving maid of the manifold sorrows and indignities she had been forced to endure. "The cowardly vassals," she said. "They have courage enough to frighten a weak woman, but no one dares to do the only thing that I desire on earth, to avenge the death of their king on the monster that killed him. And yet I have promised, although unwillingly, to give my hand to the true knight and hero that will do this thing." "There is only one man," said the maid, "who could do the deed, and that is a Greek, Forthietrich, whose fame is spread abroad in every land." "The avenger is come, great queen," said the hero, stepping out of the shade where he had stood. "I will venture my life to conquer the dragon." The two women started back in alarm. "It is Wolfthietrich!" cried the maid. "He once saved me from a band of robbers." "Thanks, noble hero," said Liebgard. "May heaven protect you on your quest. But the monster will take your life as it did my husband's. Nay, go your way in peace, and leave me to my fate." But when the Greek showed her that his mind was firm, Liebgard gave him a ring which the dwarf had told her would bring good luck to the wearer, wished him all success, and then returned to Castle Garden. Without more delay, the hero turned his horse to the mountains, and made the best of his way to the Lindworm's hall, which at length he reached. He peeped into the dark cavern, and saw 5 dragons' heads staring and hissing at him. These were the young worms. The old one had gone out to seek for food. The hero was about to slay them there and then, but it suddenly occurred to him that it would be better if the old worm knew nothing of his coming, and it would be an easy task to kill the little ones when the mother was dead. So remounting his horse, he set out in search of the monster. As he rode on slowly, he saw a beautiful child standing on a rock. It called to him, "You are come to revenge my son, Audnit. Beware that you sleep not, for if you sleep my son will remain unrevenged, and you will fall a prey to the dragon."
"My good friend," laughed the hero, "you are too young to be a father. I advise you to look out for yourself. You would be a sweeter morsel for the monster than I." And setting spurs to his horse, he rode away laughing. Like Audnit, he came first to the high cliffs, and then to the meadow, where clover grass and flowers grew in wonderful profusion. A linden tree shaded part of it from the heat of the midday sun. The hero was tired after his long journey and wakeful night. He stretched himself in the shade to rest, while his horse grazed in the meadow. Fatigue, the fresh, sweet air, and the song of the birds in the branches overhead all combined to make him drowsy, so he gradually fell asleep. Perfect peace reigned in the quiet spot. It seemed as though it might last forever. But suddenly it was broken by a horrible hissing, a crashing of rocks and breaking of trees. The dreadful monster, the terror of the land, was drawing near. At the same moment Alberich exclaimed, "Wake, noble hero! Sleep no more! The Lindworm is upon you!" The dwarf repeated his warning several times in vain. The faithful horse galloped up to his master and kicked him, but he did not awake. It was not until the dragon gave utterance to a loud and hideous roar that made the rocks crack and the mountains tremble that the hero was at last aroused from his trance. He sprang to his feet and attacked the monster, but his weapons were all too weak for the work they had to do. They broke like reeds on the creature's hide, without doing it any injury. So he flung the handle of his broken sword in the monster's face, and commended his soul to God, for he was defenceless. The worm caught him up in the coils of its long tail, and at the same moment seized the horse in its great jaws. Then it bore its victims away to its den, and threw them down as food for its young, after which it went away again in search of more food. The little dragons tried to devour Wolfdieterich, but could not. He was so well protected by his shirt of palm silk, so they thrust him aside unconscious, and turned their attention to the horse, which they soon disposed of. In the middle of the night Wolfdieterich came to himself, and began to look about him carefully. The moonlight penetrated the cavern, and showed him at a little distance something that shone bright red. He moved towards it cautiously for fear of waking the dragons, and found that the object which had attracted his eye was a huge carbuncle in a sword hilt. He at once knew that this must be the sword Rosen, and took possession of it, as well as the rest of Audnit's armour that he found lying uninjured amongst other coats of mail, which however were all more or less broken. With the armour he found a ring. This he put upon his finger. His preparations were no sooner completed than daybreak came, and with it the old Lindworm. He at once attacked her, and, thanks to the magic sword, slew her and all her brood after a hard struggle. Thoroughly exhausted, he threw himself under a tree, where he lay panting and breathless. There Alberich found him, and revived him with food and wine. Before the victorious hero set out on his return to Garden, he went back into the dragon's den to get the heads of the monsters. But when he had cut them off, he
he found that they were much too heavy to carry, so he contented himself with taking their tongues. These he put in a leather bag that one of Alberich's dwarfs brought him for the purpose, and then began his journey, which was made longer and more wearisome by having to be done on foot. He often lost his way among the wild mountains, and did not reach his destination for many days. When he got to Garden, he found the castle full of feasting and mirth. Wondering much, he went to a pious hermit who lived near, and asked him the meaning of what was going on. From him he learned that the Burggrave Gerhard had slain the Lindworm, and was to be married to beautiful Liebgard that very evening. Forthietrich then begged the holy man to lend him priestly garments, and having received those that had formerly belonged to brother Martin, the hermit's predecessor, he put them on over the armour he had found in the dragon's cave, and repaired to the castle. He entered the great hall, and saw Burggrave Gerhard, nicknamed Hawksnose, seated next to the pale queen, who, with her maidens, filled the glasses of the guests. Above the Burggrave's chair were the dragons' heads, symbols of his victory. When the queen saw the pretended hermit, she took him a cup of wine, which he emptied at a draught, and then gave back, having slipped into it the ring she had given him on the evening he started on his quest. Liebgard did not notice the ring till she had returned to her seat by Gerhard's side. Then she trembled violently, but forcing down her emotion, she desired the hermit to approach, and tell her from whom he got the ring. "Lady, you gave it to me yourself," he said, throwing aside his disguise. Every eye was fixed on him as he stood in the middle of the hall, clad in Ortnit's wondrous armour, and looking more like a god than a mortal man. When, advancing to the queen, he laid her husband's ring in her hand, and told her how and where he had found it, many voices cried, "Hail to the avenger of our king, the slayer of the dragon and its brood! Hail to the new king of Lombardy!" Burggrave Gerhard was not to be put aside so easily. He pointed to the dragons' heads as proofs of his right, but when Wolfdieterich produced the tongues from his wallet, there was no more to be said but for Burggrave Gerhard to beg the hero's pardon. This he received on condition of swearing fealty. Wolfdieterich was now proclaimed King of Lombardy, and was told that he was expected to marry the queen. "My lords," he said, "as ruler of this kingdom, I am also the servant of my people, and am bound to labour for their welfare. But as regards personal matters, such as the choice of a wife, I must be free, and the queen must also be free to choose as she lists. She is yet mourning the loss of her first husband, but if she holds me worthy to succeed him, and thinks that my love and reverence will comfort her for his loss, I offer her my hand for life." Liebgard, remembering what Ortnit had said to her, placed her hand in the hero's, and was married to him before long. Wolfdieterich was no longer the impetuous boy who had left Lilienporte, but a man who can act with wisdom, prudence, and forethought. He felt that his first duty was to restore peace and quiet to Lombardy, and that only after that was done would he be at liberty to consult his own wishes and start to the assistance of his faithful servants. A year was spent in this labour, and then he told his wife that he must go to Lilienporte. She wept, and said that she feared lest, like Ortnit, he should never return, but in the same breath confessed that he was right, and helped him to make ready for his journey and that of his army, which was to number 60,000 men. The 11. Winds and waves were in their favour, and the army landed at a short distance from Constantinople. Whilst the men encamped in the wood, the king set out in peasant's clothes to pick up all the news he could learn. After spending hours wandering about the city, and hearing nothing that was of any use to him, he chanced to meet Ortwin, a Gauler, and a former acquaintance of his. The man carried a basket filled with black bread. The hero went to him and asked him to give him a loaf for Wolfdieterich's sake. The man looked at him keenly and recognized him. "Ah, sire," he said, "things have gone badly here with us. The good old empress died during the siege of Lilienporte. When the fortress capitulated, the noble Duke Bertung and his sons were put in irons and flung into a dark and dismal dungeon. Death soon put an end to the old man's pain, but the 10 young lords are still kept in strict confinement, and I may bring them no better food than a daily supply of this black bread and water." Wolfdieterich was miserable when he thought that he was not without guilt with respect to his mother and his old friend. He could do nothing for them now, but he might still do something for the 10 faithful servants who yet remained. He arranged with Ortwin that they should have better food, and should be cheered by the hope of a speedy deliverance. The old gaoler went on his way, and the king returned to his people. He found his men already under arms, for they told him that Sabine had discovered not only that they were there, but what had brought them. The armies met, and the battle raged long and furiously, without either side getting the better of the other. But at last the fortune of the day turned. The citizens of Constantinople rose in revolt against the tyranny that had ground them down so long, hastened to the prison, and set Bertung's 10 brave sons at liberty. Having done this, they put themselves under their command, and marched to the assistance of Forthietrich. It was a glorious victory. The hero was proclaimed emperor on the battlefield. Soon after their return to the capital, Sabine and the royal brothers were brought before their judges. The first was sentenced to death, and was at once led away to instant execution. The death of the 2 latter was likewise demanded by both people and army, and Wolfdieterich knew that they were guilty of causing the death of their mother and that of old Bertung, and had brought upon him all the troubles and difficulties of his early youth. Yet he could not decide what was best to be done, and reserved judgment until the following day. That night, as the victor slept the sleep of the just, his mother appeared to him in a dream, saint-like and beautiful in aspect. She said, "Spare my children, and my blessing shall rest on thee." And immediately Bertung appeared at her side. "God has mercy upon his erring children. Do not shed thy brother's blood." As the hero gazed at the apparitions in intense amazement, Hildegard joined them, and said gently, "Hast thou not gained kingdom, glory, and me, through the ill deeds of thy brothers? Return them, therefore, good for evil." Morning broke. The figures vanished, leaving Wolfdieterich resolved what he should do. He called the nobles together, and before them all pardoned Borgen and Wachsmuth, restored them their dignities and lands, to be held thenceforth as great fiefs under him. At first no one approved of his clemency, but on hearing his explanation all were silenced. As soon as his arrangements were completed, Wolfdieterich returned with his army to Lombardy, and was welcomed by Hildegard with the greatest joy. After resting there for a while, he, his princes, and their followers went to Rome, where he was crowned emperor. At the feast which followed the coronation he appointed the 10 sons of good Duke Bertung to be rulers of great fiefs. Herbrand, the eldest, received Garden and its territory. Through his son Hildebrand, of whose valiant deeds we shall hear later on, he was ancestor of the Wulfings. Rache was given Rhineland, with Breisach as his capital. His son Eckhard was the protector of the Harlungs, Imbreke and Friedele. He is celebrated in song and story as the trusty Eckhard. Berchther, the 3rd son, succeeded his father at Meran. The other sons were as well endowed, but not as famous as their brothers, so their names and possessions need not be told. Wolfdieterich and Hildegard had a son, whom they named Hugdieterich after his grandfather. He grew up to be a mighty hero, and was the father of a valiant race.